single 3-year extension. And then we'll cover the costs of the construction.
Right. So this question might be for Ms. Richards, but so then that means that we aren't extending any additional financial benefit to Ellen that we haven't already agreed upon. Is that correct?
Correct. We're kind of losing the incentive value of that forgiveness because, as Mr. Marbeck said, corporate GE just will not consider anything beyond a 3-year extension. But the upside of the request is that we don't have any risk whatsoever on the fit-up cost. We'll be getting reimbursed for that right out of the chute.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
To that point, Meredith, and thank you, Mr. Marbeck, for being here. So to that point, so from a flow of money standpoint, then, so when I'm understanding that the LM will pay that back over 3 years, amortized at 2%, will the JDA, will we be paying the costs up front and then be reimbursed? Or how do you envision that working?
Yes, we would be fronting the cost of the fit-up, but rather than deferring that or perhaps entirely foregoing it for 6 years, we'll be getting repaid at the rate of about $5,000 a month.
And is that, thank you, is there a note, or is that amending the lease rate, or how would we do that? How would we document that?
Well, Mr. Gostad has reviewed the original lease and GE has commented. We haven't incorporated these changes, but I would defer to him in terms of how that would be done.
Given the fact that I think you had some other past costs that were amortized over a certain period of time, so it would seem to me that it would logically just fit within the lease agreement itself.
So just amend the lease rate and then moving forward, which I'm fine with that. And then if they, obviously if there's an opt-out during the period, I know there is an option to opt out if they wanted after 2 years to move to another facility. If that would be the case, what happens to the remaining unamortized balance? Has that been addressed? Or?
Yes, if they opt out, then we're made whole on the fit-up cost, not the forgiven rent.
Yep. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Any further questions or comments for Mr. Marbeck or Ms. Richards? Hearing none, I'd be looking for a motion.
I'll move.
Have a motion from Mr. Holt.
Second.
Second from Mr. Kami. With the motion on the floor, any other further questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign, motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Marbeck. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to a long and continued partnership with LM Wind in our community.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. The next item under our suspended agenda is the old item 6.B, Cirrus purchase option. And we're lucky to welcome Mr. King to join us today over Zoom. Ms. Richards, you'll be presenting this?
Mr. Phelan.
Mr. Phelan, yes, please, Mr. Phelan.
Thank you, Growth Fund Chair Weber. I think if we could do it this way, we had a visit with Mr. King, and when I say we, Keith Lund of the EDC, Mayor Buczynski, City Council President Sandy had an opportunity to visit with Mr. King last week when he was in town for some other business. And what came up was this opportunity to move forward with the purchase option sooner rather than later. And so what the request is of Mr. King, and he says, speaking of long-term relationships, this is a 24-year relationship that we have with Cirrus that has certainly seen a lot of ups and a lot of downs, but we've always stuck together, which is it's really an incredible story. But based on that conversation last week, we said, let's, if the want of Cirrus to move forward sooner rather than later, that we would be open to that concept. You see in your packet of information today a letter from Mr. King and Cirrus that they would like to move to the end of the year on this purchase. and to continue our long-term relationship. So the thought was to move sooner rather than later as we move forward. I would, after Mr. King kind of says it better than anyone else can, I would like to have Mr. Lund also, has been part of this long-term relationship too, kind of maybe be the third person in on this thing, and then we'd open up to any Q&A on behalf of the committee. So with that, Mr. King.
Bill has lost connection, he's trying to log on.
Oh, he's, Mr. King's trying to log back in. He had lost connection, so maybe I can keep talking until Mr. King comes in, but really, the intent of Cirrus at this point in time is they're at a point in, they've performed relatively well during this terrible pandemic, which is a really great thing. They, corporate-wide, they're looking at investments throughout their portfolio to include Grand Forks, and if they want to move forward with some of those investments, it would be important to own the buildings that they want to move forward with in investments. And so the thought is, if we move forward sooner rather than later, we're going to miss out on 3 more months of rent, which would approximate about $250,000. However, we move forward with the purchase option sooner rather than later, and it allows Cirrus to move forward with some of the capital reinvestments that they want to make in the facilities that they own, to include this building right here. And so that's why, looking at the greater good, looking at the greater landscape, to have them own the building and want to make some of those improvements sooner rather than later, that some have, which may have been deferred since, we were going to transfer ownership. They would like to move forward with some of those enhancements to the building as we move forward. And I see Mr. King is joining us too, so Mr. King, I just kind of provided an overview of our conversation last week, your letter, and some of the reasons why we'd like to move forward sooner rather than later, and have you say it in your own words, because you say it better than anyone else.
Thank you, Todd. Welcome, Mr. King. Looks like there may still be some lingering connection problems.
Maybe while Mr. King gets rebooted here, Keith, would you mind kind of giving the historic background of how we've gotten to the purchase option today that we have in front of us too, and maybe have Mr. King.
And Bill, if you can hear us, you jump in and, we've got Mr. King now. Why don't you go ahead?
I'm not sure if you've got my audio. That's my question.
We do. I can hear you very well, thanks.
Oh, good.
Thank you, sir.
Great, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the time today. We appreciate it very much. The real interest we have is, I don't think this is a mystery really to anybody. We have always, Grand Forks and our team there have always been a critical part of our component manufacturing and part of our whole project. And in fact, every single airplane we've ever built that's been delivered into the market, every component was built in Grand Forks, North Dakota. So we're proud of that and proud of the heritage that brings with it. So we're excited about this. When we conceived of this back in 1995, I mean, who could have imagined I'd be this old at this stage and being here today with you. So thank you so much for the time. We're excited about what this represents, because this is just the next logical step in our growth strategy, in what we see as, for lack of a better way to say it, a really good start in our growth cycle. We see great things in the future. We certainly know that next year is going to be, we have certainly planned on producing more products next year than this, which means that we've got to start thinking about how we expand our operations in some form or fashion, including the potential for looking at relocating and realigning some of our manufacturing to incorporate more in our Grand Forks complex. So we're excited about this. We're frankly thrilled to be in this position today, and we're actually looking to accelerate our acquisition, because it works better for us for our internal uses to be doing the acquisition this year in 2020 instead of 2021. But we're excited about this. This is, to us, this is a big deal. It may not be to anybody else, but it's a huge deal to us, and we're excited about taking this step forward, leaning in and owning. We've always seen ourselves as owning this property. and we own virtually all of our manufacturing complex here in Duluth, back in our main complex back here. And this is just the next logical step in acquiring this complex. So with that, I'd be happy to address any questions you may have, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to say thank you to the JDA, to really the City Council, to the Development Corporation for all your support for all these years. And we don't see this as the end. We see this as just sort of the next logical step as we continue to expand and grow our footprint and our operations in Grand Forks.
Very good, and thanks again for taking the time to meet with us today, Mr. King. Mr. Lund.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Growth Fund Committee. Hello, Bill. Very nice to see you again. Just wanted to provide just a little bit of an overview. This is odd looking forward and looking back at you. I'm not exactly sure where to look, but I'll do my best. And this has been talked about a 24 relationship, but really it's been longer than that, and I think Bill can attest. This relationship started with Cirrus long, a number of years before we struck the deal in 1995. I really wasn't involved in the process, but I've talked to Bill and many others that were. So we had been, as a community, courting Cirrus for a number of years before really consummated the relationship in terms of, that initial lease. That original lease was, original facility was financed primarily through a sales tax revenue bond, and there was an expansion around the 2001 timeframe that I recall that was right around $1.4 million, which really some mechanical upgrades to really get the temperature and humidity under control. In 2005 timeframe, Cirrus really had a need to expand. They had a long lead time on their product, and really it was a competitive process. It was a competitive project, and Cirrus, I think it's fair to say, was considering all their options, and the community came together to put together what we thought was a very competitive proposal and ultimately won the day. But really we structured a deal that was a capital lease for Cirrus. So they signed, a lease for the entire term of financing, and it really, from that standpoint, I'll just speak for myself, it really was their facility right out of the chute. So they signed a lease for the entire 15-year relationship. And I just wrote down from memory here, just while I was sitting waiting for the opportunity, this had financing from the North Dakota Development Fund, through the Bank of North Dakota, through their match loan program. There was some conventional financing, PACE loans, direct financing from the Growth Fund, and a jobs training loan through Job Service North Dakota. So really put our best foot forward and put together a really competitive financing package. The 15-year relationship, again, I mentioned Cirrus signed up for the entire lease. It was a capital lease, and the purchase option of 1.9 was agreed upon back 15 or 16 years ago, and it really was to recapture some of that initial investment that the Growth Fund made up front. We're really excited that Cirrus has been a partner. Todd referred to maybe some times that weren't the best, but I think we've had a fantastic relationship. Bill will attest, and has said many times, how the community and the company stood side by side, and I tell you what, it's a fantastic success story. Demand for their products, Bill can talk about it if he wants to in terms of record years and what they're planning next year, and some of the capital investments and growth that I think are, likely to appear in the region. So I hope that provides just a little bit of a backdrop of our, 15-year relationship from this expansion, but really, 20, 22, 23 years, maybe even up to 25 years relationship with the company. So I'd be happy to answer any more questions. Again, this is just from recollection, waiting to speak here today, but pleased that Bill's joining us, and pleased that, something that we struck 15 years ago was coming to fruition. I agree with Bill. Didn't know that I'd be here, didn't think I'd be this old, but I'm pleased that I'm here to see it.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Lund. Committee members, any questions or comments for Mr. Phelan, Mr. King, or Mr. Lund? Fantastic, happy news to learn about this. If there's no comments, I'd be looking for a motion.
So moved. Thank you, Mr. King. This is Mr. Wolf. Thank you for being here in the community.
Well, thank you. We're honored to be a part of it.
I'll second the motion, just echo Mr. Wolf's comments too. I know, Mr. King, you said it's a big deal to you guys, it's a big deal to us too. We appreciate your continued partnership and know that you've been committed to Grand Forks for a long time, and it's certainly a great story for us to be able to tell. So thanks again for being here, and thanks for your continued partnership with Grand Forks, and I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf and Mr. Holt. We have a motion and a second. Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign, motion carries. We'll see you again, we'll finalize this on November 2nd at the JDA, is that correct, Mr. Phelan, Ms. Richards?
That is correct. It'll be in front of you next, yes, November 2nd, thank you.
Very good.
And Bill, I think you were planning to be here in person if possible on the 2nd.
I am indeed. We still have air superiority, so we're looking forward to being there.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it should be a bit of a celebration, and things like this don't have to turn out this way, and they have, so we're all very thankful.
Thank you all. We appreciate it very much.
All right, well, it's kind of anticlimactic now after those two bits of business, but let's move on to some other Growth Fund Committee business. Item number 2, approval of the minutes from September 28th. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, looking for a motion.
Move.
I'll second.
Kwame, second from Ms. Dockler. Any further questions or comments? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. By the way, Chris, I had to pinch myself for a moment there. You made a motion and a comment, didn't you? It's pretty ebullient of you, sir. It was good news. That aside, next item on the agenda, election of chair and vice chair. Let's start off with any discussion. Mr. Kawami?
Yeah, it's a discussion unless anybody else would like to kick off before me. Nope? Okay. So I just wanted to go, I guess, on the record as we're meeting as a committee, that I just have concerns. I've talked with, I think, pretty much everybody on the committee and some other folks outside of the committee just around JDA and Growth Fund Committee being chaired by the same person. So I'm here today fully supportive of Brett's leadership and willing to support Brett continuing to be the chair and would gladly vote for his continuation of being the chair. But I do want to set some progress or set some wheels in motion on the discussion of what do we want to do. Let's zoom out a little bit and talk about how JDA and Growth Fund work together, and let's try to make sure that, and not that this has happened, but there's always the opportunity when you have the same leadership with a committee that's then making recommendations to another committee that maybe a bias could, move from one to the other. Again, not saying that this has, but this creates the potential for that. And there's lots of opportunities to get some changes going on with the Growth Fund. Things like maybe expanding our membership to include more community members. Things like maybe changing it to where we have the opportunity to have our Growth Fund Committee people not have to recuse themselves, or if they do have to recuse themselves, if there's more membership, then we can know that we still have representation from the different sectors that we're trying to have represented with our Growth Fund Committee. Those are a couple of things that I think are really pressing and need to be addressed, in addition to looking at ways to maybe get our agenda items out a little bit earlier. I think that that's an issue that's prevalent with all things that we're doing here at City Council, unfortunately, in City Hall. So these are just concerns, and I've shared all of these with Brett, and Brett shares, I think he has some of the exact same concerns. I think everybody that I've talked to has some of the same concerns. So all I'm saying is, if we all have these concerns, let's do something. So if we're going to continue to support Brett, which I would gladly do, let's talk about that and let's get these things on the agendas, and then let's zoom out and let's talk about how these two entities work together and how do we protect the community so that we have differences of opinion and we have different leadership and we have, I guess, forward progress and protect the interests of the committees, protect the interests of the citizens going forward. So that's just my piece I want to throw out there.
Any other comments or?
Yeah, this is Jonathan, Mr. Chair, if I may. I would just like to, I think, echo Mr. Kavami's comments. I plan on supporting Mr. Weber today as chair. I do think, Kyle, you said let's zoom out a little bit here and look at, some of the structure and expanding of the board and, getting agenda items in front of us with a little more lead time so we can have some discussion about it. I would even argue that I think maybe we've zoomed out too much in the past, and the point where we've looked past this stuff, I would, and I know it's just semantics over terminology, but I would like to see us really zoom in on those things, and let's even leave, if possible, today's meeting with a timeline for expanding this board, because we have talked about that dating back to, before, I think even before Mr. Wolf was on the committee. We've talked about this for a while, and I don't think, I still haven't talked to anybody that disagrees that that's the right move. So I think, after today's election, I would like to see us move forward with that and maybe put a timeline on it, and also just talk about what it means to have all of us as committee members more engaged in the discussion around these items. And I think, that's really the notion behind getting the agenda items sooner, is that so we just have more time to review, have discussion around them, and come to this committee with more thoughtful comments and approach. So, Mr. Kalami, thank you for your comments. I appreciate them, and I think I would like to see us, frankly, put a little more detail behind what some of those items look like moving forward, so we're not kicking the can down the road further.
Quick response. This has been in my just 6 years, but 6 years experience, well, I guess longer, because I've been, in my experience at this committee, this has been an unusual year, for good reasons. We've had a fantastic amount of activity, activity that probably would not have been anticipated back when COVID first raised its head. So it's been a good year, and a lot of these deals have been matters that have come up rather suddenly and often required kind of fast acting, and we should be credited for that. While there's always going to be this tension, we'd like more time to weigh these matters, discuss them. We also want to make sure that we're responsive, open for business, and that we have a dynamic process that takes advantage of good deals. For instance, the Cirrus deal, the letter came to my knowledge for the first time Sunday evening. I don't know that it was available to staff much before that, and so we want to be able to jump on these deals when they become available, strike when the iron's hot, but we also want to try to have time to discuss them. So there's that ongoing debate. Similarly, we have been discussing for the last year expanding this committee size so that we can have greater community input. I think that's an important distinction between the Growth Fund Committee and the JDA, is that this would ideally be a majority community base. And I would ask that Ms. Richards, Mr. Lund, perhaps we could receive some recommendations from the EDA. I think we've discussed the notion of expanding the size of the committee. There are no roadblocks. We just need to get that done, and we haven't done it because we've been busy making deals, which is an excuse, but a pretty good excuse. With that, any further comments about the process or anything else?
Chairman Weber, this is Mayor Bochensky. I just had a quick comment on the size of the growth fund. To change the size, it would require a code change, so it'd be something we need to bring in front of council. If you look at code 24-0108, it would require a code change there to increase the size. So it's something we'd have to bring in front of council, but otherwise I think this is a great discussion, very important. There's going to be a fairly large amount of money coming in the next year or so that we need to get put to work. So I think a lot of these are great discussions as far as maybe working together on agenda items and other pieces there. I certainly agree with everybody. I certainly agree with Kyle on his comments as well about possibly separating the leadership on the JDA and the Growth Fund. And I think Mr. Holt is certainly onto something with getting a more collaborative effort, I think, between the leadership of the Growth Fund, myself, Community Development, and the EDC to work together to set that agenda and have good discussions not only on the Growth Fund but in the JDA as well. So those would be my points. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Gaustad, in terms of requesting a code change, that would have to go to the Committee of the Whole and then go to Council twice. That would be the process, is that correct?
That's an accurate statement. Just you do want to bring it through the COW first, and then it takes 2 readings to modify an ordinance.
And to get that on a COW agenda as quickly as possible, assuming that the Growth Fund committee members would support something like that, what process might you suggest? Is that something that we can discuss and maybe even vote on today, or does that need to be wait until the next Growth Fund committee
Well,
meeting?
I think I'd like to have some direction as to what size you're thinking of, and also what the composition is going to be, if you're going to think about changing the composition. Because right now, the ordinance talks about 3 city council members and 2 nominated by EDC. So I'd like a little bit of direction before I start drafting an ordinance change, so I know what the kind of the thought process would be. And that's something maybe that a discussion with Mr. Kavami and Mr. Weber, and as to what their thoughts are, or Mr. Wolf, or anybody else that might have some input on that, just so I have direction. I'm not just drafting something that I think should be submitted.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Gostad.
Mr. Chairman?
Based on previous conversations, the discussion has always been, in my memory, expansion to 7, with there being 4 community members, the 3 council members, 4 community members, with the recommendation from EDC for those community members. That was what I'm remembering the discussion being. Ms. Richards.
Your recollection is correct. This was discussed by the committee last year, and there was significant discussion. The recommendation out of Growth Fund Committee was to proceed with adding 2 community members, and there was significant discussion about the representation. That did just kind of stall at the former city attorney's office in terms of an ordinance change, but I can certainly share the notes from that meeting, and we can put this back on the front burner.
Mr. Kavami, please.
Yeah, just a couple other questions, and I definitely appreciate the need to strike while the iron's hot. And I think with the several folks that I've talked to, I think that we'd be willing to meet more often if that meant that we could have access to the information sooner. You know, if you look at, you know, if we're cutting off at 5 o'clock on Friday or whatever that day is, I would be much more comfortable if we could cut it off on Wednesday or Thursday, or maybe even earlier. If that meant we had to meet 2 weeks in a row, that would be fine by me, and that would be a sacrifice I'd be willing to make. If that meant that we could, 1, strike while the iron's hot, and then 2, be properly informed and be able to, you know, act and ask questions and engage based on what's on the agenda items. So I guess next follow-up question is, if you look at the agenda process now, when is that agenda, when is that set, and when are you setting that agenda?
Well, it's a good question, and in fact, over the last year, we made a number of exceptions to our regular process of doing business. So we've been having additional or out-of-sequence Growth Fund meetings to take advantage of opportunities, bring the committee together. We tried to get back onto our more standard process of Growth Fund once a month with JDA 2 weeks after, so that there's proper lag. But Ms. Richards, do you have any further response to Mr. Kavami's inquiry there?
Well, as you stated, our normal meeting date is the 3rd Monday, but as you said, to be responsive, we frequently adjust that to, you know, allow time for somebody to get their item on the agenda. Staff is certainly willing to discuss options to expand the time between when that agenda goes out and when the committee is expected to meet. I recognize that the turnaround time is really tight, but there's nothing that would require a code change to change our meeting times or dates. So this is all procedural, and we can certainly look at those options.
You know, I appreciate that, Meredith. As an elected official, I get that I have to be agile and I have to be available, but as we look to our citizen committee members, and even as we look to expand our citizen committee members, I think asking them to put their weekend on hold and really take a thorough deep dive in what needs to be voted on, it's concerning, especially again as we're looking to expand our citizens on role there. So a follow-up to that, I guess, is to Chairman Weber, is that so it sounds like we're all in support of you maintaining leadership here, and I think that's great. So then can we have, I guess, an agreement that for the next JDA agenda, if we're going to get the discussion of leadership of JDA and as it relates to leadership of growth, can that be an agenda item for the JDA's next meeting?
I would welcome that, yes. Can we have that put on the next JDA agenda, Ms. Richards?
Yes, we can lead off just as we initially intended to lead off this meeting with the election.
A couple other related issues, one more directly, indirectly first. This committee began emphasizing a greater regional emphasis over the last couple of years. This is consistent with the work of Mr. Baumbach. And so part of the discussion had been that among those 4 community members, we strive to make one of those 4 someone from outside of Grand Forks City, since sales tax supports JDA, and sales tax is generated largely by the region, regional shoppers, etc. I'm wondering, is there any appetite among the current Growth Fund members to have that kind of expansion, not just to go from 2 community members to 4, but to making one of those 4 someone from outside of the city?
I think if the EDC is nominating those individuals anyway, they would have a good read on who would serve in that capacity best. And so I would have no problem saying that we should include somebody from the wider Grand Forks County, since we have moved to that.
I'd absolutely consider that. I got a question from Ms. Richards again. So it sounds like a year ago it was 4 members. So then why was the recommendation down to 2? Or I guess what drove that decision? So why is it 4? And then it sounds like you just said before that it was 2, or is that not the case?
It's always been 2 community members. The Growth Fund Committee had agreed to expand it to 4, and it just languished in the city attorney's office. There were a lot of, with the sale of the center building and some other work, there was a lot going on around Growth Fund, and I believe that just languished. Is that correct, Ms. Richards, from your perspective?
Yes, as Mr. Gosted says, it does take an ordinance change that has to go through city council rather than the JDA approving it. So it was just, yes, held up. I can certainly, Mr. Kavami, I can sure get the minutes from that previous discussion to you to review. But my recollection is there was significant discussion on, should certain positions be required, for instance, having an attorney, having an accountant, having a banker. At the end of the day, the discussion was primarily to leave it up to the EDC board to nominate, and then the same procedure that we have now for approval of those committee members through mayor and council.
And so the recommendation was to add 2 more, not to add 4 more. Is that correct?
Correct. Add 2 more for a total of 4 community members.
Okay. Thank you. That was the clarity I was looking for. Yeah.
And I'll just add, I'm not beholden to that number. I do remember, I think we should just take a look at it and see what's best for the group. I know that we talked about diversity of professions as a part of wanting to have, different viewpoints. But I also know we talked about not wanting to handcuff ourselves by writing that into the code per se. So I would be in favor of, I know someone made the comment of Chairman Weber and Mr. Kavami, maybe Keith from the EDC, someone just taking a look at this and having some sort of draft sent to Mr. Gosted to move forward so we could get going with it quickly. I'm happy to help as well. Just let me know, but I would like to see us move forward with this sooner rather than later.
So Dan, what would be best for you? What do you need from us, and what's the quickest way for us to do that?
Those meeting minutes would be helpful, and Chairman or any member of the committee, if they have any thoughts as to what they want to be in the ordinance. The way I'm got it right now, there are 2 issues. One is to add 2 community members to expand it so it'd be a 7-person board, 4 from the EDC and 3 from the city council members at this point. I've also got something about language as far as leadership of the growth committee versus leadership of the JDA, and whether that you want to ingrain that within the ordinance as well. Those are the 2 changes. Those are relatively easy to do, but if there are other thought processes, the one thing you want to be, and I think I don't know if it was Mr. Holt that mentioned this, is you put too much in the ordinance and then it doesn't work well, you have to come back and ask to change it. So sometimes you don't want to put too much in and maybe create some policies and procedures that you can live by.
Right. I think at this time, Mr. Lund has a clear sense of kind of the general spirit and will of the committee regarding that expansion. We don't want to hamstring them by putting too many requirements on it.
Taking off of Mr. Gostad's last comment, I can't help but wonder, if the existing code says that it's 5 members, right? 3 city councilors and 2 community members. I wonder if the best approach is just eliminating that number from the ordinance altogether. So if we decide a year from now that we would like to add 2 more members, we don't have to go through an entire process again of, bringing it to change the ordinance in front of council again. I don't know if that's the right approach, but, I serve on a number of other boards where we've got some flexibility in our membership with numbers, and that's because our bylaws state that we have that flexibility. So maybe the ordinance doesn't say we need to have 7. Maybe it just doesn't say that we need to have 5 anymore.
It certainly can be, you can consider that. The one point I do want to make is I think there needs to be some guidance as to how these individuals are placed on this growth committee, who selects it. One thought is, do you have the 4 committee members? Do you have 3 selected by the EDC and 1 selected by the mayor? Those type of things that could be considered, but I do think you need to have at least some baseline so we know that what the size of this growth committee is going to be and how it gets selected.
And I believe right now the EDC nominates those people, but it's a mayoral appointment. Is that correct? So ultimately it's the mayor that appoints the person, or am I wrong on that?
They are nominated by the EDC and confirmed by City Council.
Okay.
So I guess just my last thing before we close is if we are going to discuss election of the chair and the vice chair, but we are also planning on scheduling a discussion of how the leadership of the 2 entities relate, is there any point in doing an election of a chair and a vice chair if we're just going to revisit that here at the next JDA meeting? And I would defer to you, Brad, as I don't want to ask you to step up or step down for anything, but if we're going to redo how this is looked at, is there any expectation or point to even doing an election?
Well, we tabled it 2 months ago on I believe, on the committee's request. What are the thoughts from committee members? It's currently on the agenda. We would either need to table it again or act on it. I believe those are our choices at this point.
And I guess I was just asking your opinion, Brett. I don't know that I think that I'm supportive of doing the vote. I just wanted your opinion on that.
Mr. Weber, could I real quick?
Please, Mayor.
I would like to see it just decided tonight, not kick down the road again. I think we've got a lot of work to do. We've got to clean it up. I guess I'd like to see a vote tonight. I think we've got a kind of a clear direction. At the next JDA, we can, take another look at it. I think, if you had to choose one of the 2, I think you've got the clear choice that you would prefer the growth fund. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know. Are we talking about holding a new election for the JDA?
Well, I think that's what they were discussing, is putting it on the next agenda item.
That wasn't my understanding, I guess, from this conversation right now. My understanding was just that we were going to discuss what it means to have the same leadership for the JDA and the growth fund, and then decide from that point what we wanted to do move forward. I didn't understand from this conversation that we were putting it onto the agenda for the JDA to choose new leadership. I think that is kind of putting the cart before the horse.
But that could be part of the discussion at the next JDA meeting.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, either way, I'd like to see it move forward here. I mean, kicking it down the road, down the road another month, I think is, it's time to get moving.
Sure.
With that said, I would like to make a motion then to nominate Brett to continue serving as the chairperson for the growth fund then.
And I'd second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We now have the also the election of the vice chair. A quick moment, if I may comment. Before becoming chair of the Growth Fund, the chair and vice chair had always been council members. I thought it was important to have a community member step into that vice chair role. I think this is a city council-driven organization in many ways, so it makes sense, and perhaps this could be part of the discussion next week or at the next JDA, but I think there's reason for the chair of the Growth Fund to continue to be a council member. However, an elected official, someone to take on that burden, that responsibility, et cetera. But I think it's equally important to have shared leadership with a vice chair being one of those community members. So that was my intent. That's never been part of the requirement. It's always just been part of the spirit over the last several years.
And I would motion to nominate Jonathan Holt as vice chair.
I would second that.
We have a motion from Mr. Kavami, a second from Ms. Dockler to nominate Mr. Holt as vice chair. Any further questions, comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Very good. Thanks for the discussion, and we'll be in touch, Mr. Gaustad, and Ms. Richards will look forward to having some related item on the next JDA meeting.
And I would just like to say thanks for the discussion as well, and thanks also for your vote of confidence. Appreciate it.
Yes, thanks for the vote of confidence as well. Much appreciated, and the important, productive discussion. These were important matters that had been in the works for some time, and it's good to be moving forward on them again, so thank you. Next item would be the C-Run loan program. We have 5A and 5B. 5A, is that Mr. Hanson or Ms. Richards?
I'll just make some quick introductory remarks and then turn it over to Colin. As you recall, we did receive CARES Act funding from EDA. This was kind of a quick rollout, obviously in the disaster recovery mode. And so where we are today is we have submitted the plan that you reviewed in late August to the EDA. We've got some comments back, so we're ready for a final adoption of the plan. But in the meantime, EDA authorized us to proceed, and so we have opened the application process and closed it, in fact. So I'm going to have Colin come up and just kind of walk you through what that application process looked like and a few of the changes that we're kind of making on the fly and that you'll really see in the next item. Go ahead, Colin.
All right, Chair Weber, members of the Growth Fund Committee, as Ms. Richards said, the application closed on October 15th. We are accepting a few applications late of folks who have reached out to us, who maybe found out about it late, and then we have been working with them. They've submitted some form of an application or some sort of interest. We're just trying to get those across the finish line, and over the next few weeks, we will be working with them, as well as the Small Business Development Center, to ensure that they have complete applications going forward. Once we continue to work with them, we're initially expecting 11 applications. One of those, since this staff report has come out, has indicated that they wish to delay this application and maybe apply in the future, but that they weren't ready. That requested amount is still sitting at $350,000 in total, roughly. I think it was $344,000 last time I checked this afternoon, but that number is still fluctuating a little bit, as well as our initial tranche was limited to $25,000 in terms of funding that we would want to give out. That was part of some other criteria that we used to, in this initial disbursement or initial tranche, to kind of make the funds available to more folks. That also included, if needed, prioritizing small businesses, those within the hospitality industry, and those who are less than 15 employees, full-time equivalents. But with that didn't necessarily materialize. The sort of excessive demand did not necessarily materialize. We received a lot of interest, but with that, there were individuals who requested more than the initial $25,000 limit, and we expect, and the limit that we do have in our existing EDA RLF plan has a max of $50,000, and I don't know, Meredith, if you want to talk more about that. But with that, now that we have the applications in, we will take the next 2 weeks to review and analyze them, along with staff from the SBDC and the EDC. We have a credit risk matrix that will be running all of the applications against, looking at things such as personal credit, collateral management experience, debt service coverage, and their capital availability and repayment ability. With that, we expect to get through that over the next few weeks and have a batch of applications ready for the Growth Fund to review in November, with final action by the JDA at the end, or at the beginning of December. So with that, I'm willing to stand for any questions from the committee.
And is this both items covered, and you're ready for questions on both items?
I was going to walk through some of those recommended changes to the RLF plan, but you can fire away with any questions and we'll take them.
Unless there's questions, my preference would be to have both reports, and then we'll just deal with questions for both at the same time, if that's all right, unless anyone has questions at this time. Why don't you go ahead and move forward, Mayor?
Well, all right, I'm going to jump into the plan portion then. Andy was going to do that, but he has daycare issues, so I'm going to speak in his stead, but I do want to give him credit for a lot of the work on putting this plan together. Both he and Colin have done yeoman's work here getting this thing launched, so it's greatly appreciated. In terms of the plan, the majority of the feedback we got from EDA was to make sure that we differentiate in that plan between this initial disbursement phase, which is kind of that disaster recovery mode, and EDA has allowed several significant modifications to their standard terms and conditions, but they also want us to address the revolve phase, when a lot of these things will go back to what is the more normal situation with the EDA RLF. So a lot of the changes that you will see in that draft that was attached is kind of cleanup and clarification of that, so that it's clear that this plan covers both phases, not just this early disbursement phase. As Colin alluded to, we were pretty conservative at the outset because we didn't know what the demand for this would be, and so we established this initial tranche process that would limit borrowers to $25,000. That, as he said, the demand is not swamping us, so we're going to just put in the plan that the maximum loan amount is $50,000 rather than that $25,000. As he said, we're looking at about $350,000 of requests now if all of those were fully funded, which still leaves us $1 million in the capital to award over the next, not quite 24 months, where I guess we're about 3 months into that 24-month period. So we are able to change this plan as needed, and we did kind of build into it a review process, but as we submit it to EDA for final approval, some of the key parameters are to set that maximum loan amount at $50,000 in this initial phase. In the revolve phase, we'll revert to EDA RLF standards, which is that would put us at about $350,000. It's based on the initial capitalization rate. We are being a little bit unconcerned about that revolve phase at the moment, knowing that we really need to focus on this initial disbursement, and we do have time, kind of along the lines of that previous discussion, to work with committee members to see if we want to set up those revolve funds for a specific purpose, either long-term COVID recovery, perhaps some focus on businesses that go through our proposed tech accelerator, versus just kind of rolling it into our existing RLF. So we're kind of going light on that long-term piece, and focusing on the initial disbursement, but we do have to address it to a certain extent in the plan. Other key elements that EDA highlighted was that deferral. They don't want us to kind of have a deferral based on request, but after that initial 6-month deferral, if a borrower wants to have a deferral period longer, they have to show an actual need or some sort of extenuating circumstances. One thing that has been added is this cool down period, so that if a former JDA or Growth Fund committee member were to want to access funding through the RLF, they would have to have been off either of those committees for at least two years. Other than that, it's basically just beefing up the plan to kind of catch up with the application forms that we have developed, kind of further detail that evaluation process that Colin just talked about, working with the SBDC and staff to kind of come up with this review criteria and approval matrix, and just kind of nailing down the details. So with that, certainly welcome to answer any questions that you've got about how this is going to roll out, but presumably we'll get these changes discussed today to EDA this week, and then the final plan will go to JDA for adoption on the 2nd, and we'll be back to this group, as Colin said, with presumably quite a few loan approvals next month.
Very good, thank you. I've got some quick questions myself. The cost per job target of $20,000, is that necessary? What is its purpose? Is that required by the EDA, or is that something that we've added in?
Yes, that's an EDA requirement, and their counseling is basically to look at our kind of the performance history of our previous RLF and base it on that. It's part of their new risk analysis matrix that they grade our RLF performance on, so we have to have a number.
Good, good. Similarly, the 2-year cool down period, that's also required?
Yes. That is not existent in any of our plans, but was recommended as something that we really need to include.
And it sounds like you're already moving very quickly on this, Mr. Hanson, but can you tell us anything about the general nature of the 11 pending applications, and can or should anything be done to expedite these loans and get the money at the hands and the applicants even sooner?
Chair Weber, members of the committee, at this point, as far as the overall picture of the applications that we've received, we do have a couple of nonprofit organizations that have come forward requesting funds, but outside of that, it's kind of an interesting mix of folks. We do have some small businesses and startups as well that have requested funds. But as far as the process goes, this is kind of a newer animal for us in that there are no primary lenders involved in this process, where a lot of other loans typically have that. So we are working to try to establish a credit analysis and working with the SBDC specifically to look at those financial numbers. And we believe that additionally, while they have worked with the Small Business Development Center in preparing their applications, a lot of these applications are coming from smaller businesses who maybe don't have a CFO or someone designated to their financial information, and so we're anticipating a little bit longer in terms of working with these applicants to make sure that their financial documents are in line, that they make sense, and that they give us an accurate picture of their business. This has also been a very good exercise for those applicants as well to go through, as many of them have not created pro formas, or maybe since COVID has started have not gotten a very accurate picture of where they're located. That's certainly not all of them, but some of them for sure. One other point I did want to let you know as well, that the current average loan application, if you average them out, is about $38,328 is the average application that we have in front of us.
Can I ask what the smallest one is?
The smallest request is for $20,000 currently. And there are applicants who would accept more, of course, but yeah, the lowest is $20,000. Of course, there's a couple that have requested up to $50,000.
And what, if anything, is being done to market this?
Currently, we've worked with our existing partners through the EDC and the Small Business Development Corporation, along with other partners within the Grand Forks entrepreneurial ecosystem, to share this through existing channels. We have also sent out press releases. I know I've been working with the Small Business Development Center to hold office hours calls to work directly with folks who are interested and maybe want to learn more. They have been reaching out to the Small Business Development Center and some to City Hall, but most have been going through the Small Business Development Center. So that's been our main sort of line of communication to startups and entrepreneurs, but I know both the Chamber and the EDC and a few other organizations such as SCORE have been sharing this information with their clients.
Very good, thank you. Any other questions or comments from committee members?
Oh, and there's no prepayment penalty, correct?
There is no prepayment penalty on this loan.
Okay. And I know, just reading the staff report, talking about the demand, and the staff report mentions that there are probably a lot of businesses, and there are a lot of businesses that are not super excited about taking on more debt right now. But the reason I ask about the prepayment penalty is I know that there's a lot of businesses that would just maybe like to be prepared, not knowing what's coming next or how long this might last. And, if it can serve as a safety net that can get, businesses, nonprofits through a couple to, 6 months of operations while we see what happens here. And then if they don't need it, they can pay it back without penalty. That might be just a nice benefit for them too. So, I think it's good that there's no prepayment penalty. And I think that some businesses might look at it that way in the coming weeks and months as well.
We did
Any
hear from
further comments or
from a
questions, or
local-
especially a direction for Mr. Hanson? As he finalizes this application?
Mr. Chair, so if I can summarize here, from what we approved previously, it looks like we are looking to potentially increase the initial disbursement to $50,000. That's what it appears to me is the main change. What else is changing high level with that we're looking at today?
You're right, that $50,000 maximum is key. We did offer a kind of an incentive for if the borrower to provide a personal guarantee, then we could reduce the interest rate by 25 basis points or extend that deferral. We don't have the demand, so that really doesn't seem necessary.
Okay.
The other key thing, I guess that cool down period is a new addition, but in terms of the actual operations, we did hear from a local lender that several businesses are expecting to have their PPP loans forgiven, but haven't gotten that forgiven yet. So we're thinking that maybe there's a little hesitancy to take on new debt until that has formally occurred, so we might see a little more interest in the coming weeks and months once that happens.
Yeah, so thank you. I was going to ask if we'd heard anything from the community on that aspect. It sounds like we have. And I think that with the PPP, that's going to be something that's going to drag throughout this year, the forgiveness piece into next year. So what was the other piece would be is if we're looking to, the initial disbursement period goes how long? Please refresh my memory.
24 months.
24 months. And then at that point, it becomes revolving. That still would be the same. And the maximum amount would be 25%, if I'm understanding that, which would be the same. So it's just those changes, and our next step would be are we looking for us to approve those changes to move forward, to have the EDA bless that? Is that what you're asking for our input on?
Correct. These are the revised changes that staff is recommending based on our conversation with EDA. So we're asking the committee to concur with those, and then we'll submit it to JDA for final action next month.
Okay. Thank you. Nothing further, Chair.
Was that a motion, Mr. Wolf?
Sure, and a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Got a motion on the floor from Mr. Wolf.
Second.
Second from Mr. Wolf. Any further questions or comments? Mr. Kavami? Nope. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The adoption is approved. And then we have two information updates. Item 6A, Corporate Center 2 leases. Ms. Richards.
Did want to just update you on the Ann Love lease. As you may recall, we discussed at our last meeting, Mr. Gosted, beginning termination, notice of default proceedings. We were on the verge of doing that, but the principals of Ann Love have since communicated with us, and that has been avoided for the time being. So hopefully we will have some sort of recommendation at the next meeting to help resolve that. Our other retail tenant in Corporate Center 2, as you know, is Kitsona. Their lease expires at the end of the year, and I've had some preliminary conversations. The Kitsona folks would like to extend. They're well aware of the heavy debt load that they're carrying, and so before we come back to you with any recommendation, we will come with a proposal that addresses both their hopes going forward as well as their plans to make up the past due debt. Hopefully that will also be on your November agenda. And while I'm talking about the November agenda, that is our last item, is to discuss meeting dates. Those are the veteran members, not that we have a lot of veteran members, but typically we have a kind of combined November-December meeting to fit a meeting in between the holidays. Our standard meeting date is, as we mentioned earlier, would be Monday, November 16th. Unless the committee wants to pick another date, that will be the final Growth Fund Committee meeting of the year. We could push it back to either Monday the 23rd, but that's the week of Thanksgiving, or Monday the 30th, which is the Monday immediately following Thanksgiving. So unless the group wants to tell me that we can't get a quorum on the 16th, that would then be the final Growth Fund Committee meeting of the year, barring, excuse me, some pretty exciting proposal that we felt we couldn't pass up and would have to call a special meeting for.
And then the final JDA meeting would be 2 weeks following whatever date we come up with.
December 7th would be the JDA meeting. Whether we meet, whatever Monday we meet in November, then the JDA would take final action on December 7th.
So our regular meeting date would be November 16th, but looking for extending that a little bit to even at the end of the year. We could go to the 23rd, but that's Thanksgiving week. What are the thoughts of the committee members? A preference one way or the other?
My only thought was just, Ms. Richard, you just said, I believe, Kitsona's lease expires at the end of this year. Correct. So at the November meeting, then, would you be coming with a proposal for an extension of that we would act on at that meeting?
That's the goal.
That's the goal. Because that's my only hesitation about only having one more meeting, is that, the next time we would meet after that then would be after their lease had expired. So I just want to be respectful to them as well and make sure that we can act accordingly as a committee to make sure that doesn't happen.
Right. We are cutting it close, but as I said, I've been in contact with Tessa, and she's aware of that schedule. So ball's kind of in her court to get a proposal together.
And with regard to that matter, Ms. Richards, do you have a preference on the 16th or the 23rd?
I'll be here regardless.
Thanks.
And then the only other comment that I would make, tagging back to our discussion earlier, was if we are going to have a proposal for lease extension that comes in front of this committee that we're expected to act on at November, that we have ample time to review that prior to the meeting, so we can come with a thoughtful discussion and be able to move forward quickly.
Is that a suggestion that we have our meeting on the 23rd then, Mr. Holt?
If it works for the rest of the committee, sure. I just, again, that would work for me, but I just want to, we've been on quite the ride with these corporate center leases over the past few months, right? And I want to make sure that we give it its due diligence when we talk about it, whatever that looks like. Obviously, we want Kitsona to continue as a tenant. I just want to make sure that we have ample time to review any sort of proposal or lease and also have a good discussion about it. So if an extra week helps accomplish that, then I would advocate for that.
Can I just pull the membership and see who would be available on the 23rd or the 30th, and then we can kind of know upfront what even our options are?
I'd be available for any of those dates, and I'm also open to meeting on the 16th and then meeting again in December. Whatever makes sense.
Yeah, as am I. That would be fine with me too, and both of those dates are open for me.
Yeah, I'd echo all of that. In fact, rather than deciding tonight, I'd be happy to wait to see how things shape up and what's going to work best for staff on this.
All right, if looks like with those three, we can have a quorum on any of those dates, so we will do our best to get a solid proposal and get it to you maybe the 10th hour instead of the 11th hour.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Richards. And with that,
Thank you.
a good meeting. Thanks, committee members. Nice work. Looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a motion from Mr. Wolf, second from Mr. Hope. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Meeting's adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.